Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power with a clear vision for Germany. They wanted to restore the nation's strength after the defeat of World War I and the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles. A central part of this plan was the use of modern science and technology. Hitler believed that Germany's future greatness depended on its ability to lead the world in innovation. He saw technology not just as a tool for economic recovery, but as a powerful weapon for achieving military dominance. This focus on technological advancement was presented to the German people as a sign of progress, a way to build a modern and powerful state that would last for 1,000 years. The Nazis skillfully blended this message of technological progress with their own twisted ideology. They promoted the idea that German engineering and scientific genius were direct results of the supposed superiority of the Aryan race. This narrative was powerful and persuasive. It gave a sense of national pride and purpose to projects that were, in reality, designed to prepare the country for a massive conflict. The regime poured enormous resources into research and development, creating a close partnership between the state, the military, and German industry. This alliance was designed to ensure that every scientific breakthrough and every new invention would serve the ultimate goal of expanding German power across Europe and beyond. This drive for technological supremacy was evident in many areas. The government launched ambitious public works projects, such as the construction of the Autobahn network. These highways were showcased as symbols of a modern, efficient Germany, connecting the nation and providing jobs. However, they also had a clear military purpose. The Autobahns were designed to allow for the rapid movement of troops and military equipment across the country. In this way, a project that appeared to be for the benefit of the civilian population was, from the very beginning, an integral part of Hitler's preparations for war. The gleaming new roads were a physical manifestation of the regime's dual strategy, promoting a vision of peaceful progress while secretly building a war machine. The Nazi leadership understood that to win the next war, they would need more than just soldiers. They would need superior weapons, advanced vehicles, and a self-sufficient economy that could withstand a prolonged conflict. This belief drove their investment in everything from synthetic fuel production to advanced rocketry. They systematically identified the brightest minds in German science and engineering and directed their efforts towards military applications. The promise of unlimited funding and state support was a powerful incentive for many researchers and industrialists, who became willing partners in the regime's ambitious and ultimately destructive plans. The fusion of technology and ideology created a formidable force, one that would soon plunge the world into darkness. One of the most famous projects of the Nazi era was the Volkswagen, or the People's Car. This initiative was personally championed by Adolf Hitler. He envisioned a simple, affordable car that almost every German family could own. The project was presented as a great social achievement, a symbol of the Nazi Party's commitment to improving the lives of ordinary citizens. The state-sponsored program called Strength Through Joy, or Kraft durch Freude, created a savings scheme where workers could put aside money each week towards owning their very own car. This was a brilliant piece of propaganda, making people feel they were part of a prosperous and caring new society. It created a sense of hope and loyalty to the regime. However, behind this public image of social progress lay a darker, military purpose. The engineer chosen to design the car, Ferdinand Porsche, was also instructed to ensure that the vehicle's chassis could be easily adapted for military use. The design of the Volkswagen Beetle was incredibly versatile. Its air-cooled engine was reliable in extreme temperatures, and its robust construction made it suitable for rough terrain. These features were not chosen by accident. They were deliberate design choices that made the car's platform perfect for conversion into a light military vehicle. The dream of a family car was, in reality, a cover for the development of a future asset for the German army, the Wehrmacht. When war broke out in 1939, the promises made to the German people were quickly broken. The vast new factory built in Wolfsburg to produce the Volkswagen did not manufacture a single car for the civilians who had been saving for one. Instead, production was immediately switched to military vehicles. The factory began churning out thousands of the Kubelwagen, a light military utility vehicle that was essentially a stripped-down Beetle with an angular open-topped body. It became the German equivalent of the American Jeep. Later, an amphibious version called the Schwimmwagen was also produced. The money saved by ordinary Germans for their people's car was effectively used to fund the production of vehicles for the war effort. The Volkswagen story is a clear example of how the Nazis manipulated public desires for their own strategic ends. They took a popular idea, affordable car ownership, and used it as a tool for rearmament and propaganda. The project helped to mobilize the workforce, develop industrial capacity, and create a versatile military vehicle, all under the guise of a peaceful social program. The German people were sold a dream of modernity and mobility, but the real product was a machine of war. The factory that was supposed to bring joy and freedom to families instead became a vital component of the Nazi military-industrial complex, demonstrating the regime's cynical and calculating approach to power. While the Volkswagen project was a public-facing initiative, other technological developments were shrouded in secrecy. The most significant of these was the German rocket program. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles placed strict limitations on Germany's military, forbidding the development of heavy artillery, tanks, and aircraft. However, the treaty made no mention of rockets. German military leaders saw this loophole as a golden opportunity. They began to secretly invest in rocket research during the late 1920s and early 1930s. This early work laid the foundation for what would become one of the most advanced and terrifying weapons programs of the war. The program was based at a remote research facility in Peenemünde on the Baltic coast. Here, a team of brilliant engineers and scientists led by Wernher von Braun worked to turn the dream of long-range rocketry into a reality. The German army poured immense resources into this project, recognizing its potential to strike at enemies from a great distance, bypassing traditional defenses. The scientists at Peenemünde made rapid progress, developing the A-4 rocket, a revolutionary liquid-fueled ballistic missile. This was a technological marvel, the first man-made object to reach the edge of space. For the engineers involved, it was a thrilling scientific challenge, a chance to push the boundaries of what was possible. As the war turned against Germany, the A-4 rocket was rebranded for propaganda purposes. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, called it the Vergeltungswaffe 2, or V2, meaning Vengeance Weapon 2. This name was chosen to create the impression that Germany was retaliating for Allied bombing raids and to boost morale on the home front. The V2 rockets were presented as a superweapon that could turn the tide of the war. Thousands were launched against cities like London and Antwerp in the final year of the conflict. While they were technologically impressive, they were militarily ineffective. They were inaccurate and could not be aimed at specific targets, making them a weapon of terror rather than a decisive military tool. The human cost of the V2 program was immense. The rockets were built in vast underground factories, such as Mittelwerk Dora, using slave labor from concentration camps. Thousands of prisoners died under horrific conditions, either from exhaustion, starvation, or execution. The number of people who died building the V2 rockets was tragically higher than the number of people killed by them. This dark reality stands in stark contrast to the image of clean scientific progress. The story of the V2 is a powerful reminder that technological advancement without a moral compass can lead to unimaginable suffering. It represents both the height of Nazi technical achievement and the depth of its inhumanity. The Nazi regime did not just control industry, it fundamentally reshaped the world of science to fit its ideology. Science was no longer seen as an independent search for truth. Instead, it became a tool to justify and advance Nazi policies. The regime promoted what it called Deutsche Physik, or German physics, which rejected the work of Jewish scientists like Albert Einstein. They dismissed relativity and quantum mechanics as Jewish science, favoring a more practical, experimental approach that they claimed was uniquely Aryan. This had a devastating effect on German scientific leadership, as hundreds of brilliant Jewish scientists were dismissed from their posts and forced to flee the country. This ideological takeover extended into the biological and medical sciences with terrifying consequences. The Nazi belief in racial purity led to the promotion of eugenics and racial hygiene. Scientists and doctors were tasked with developing theories to support the idea of a master race and the inferiority of others, particularly Jews, Roma, and Slavs. This perversion of science provided a pseudo-scientific justification for the regime's horrific policies of forced sterilization, euthanasia, and ultimately, genocide. The academic and medical establishments became complicit in these crimes, lending an air of legitimacy to policies that were based on hatred and prejudice. Research that should have been used to heal was instead used to harm and to justify murder. The state's control over research was absolute. Funding and academic positions were given only to those who were loyal to the Nazi Party and willing to align their work with its goals. This created an environment of fear and conformity. Scientists who disagreed with the regime's ideology were silenced, imprisoned, or forced to emigrate. The result was a scientific community that, while still capable of impressive technical achievements in certain fields, was morally and intellectually corrupted. The free exchange of ideas, which is essential for true scientific progress, was destroyed. Instead, research was narrowly focused on areas that served the state military technology, industrial self-sufficiency, and racial science. This fusion of ideology and science shows that the Nazi pursuit of innovation was not a neutral or benevolent quest for knowledge. It was driven by a political agenda that placed power and racial purity above all else. The laboratory became an extension of the state, and the scientist became a servant of the regime. This corruption of the scientific ethos had long-lasting consequences, not only for Germany, but for the world. It serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of allowing political ideology to dictate the course of scientific inquiry. The pursuit of knowledge must always be guided by ethical principles and a commitment to human dignity. In 1936, Hitler launched the Four-Year Plan, a comprehensive economic program designed to prepare Germany for war. The plan's primary goal was to achieve national self-sufficiency, or autarky, and to rapidly accelerate rearmament. Hermann Göring, a leading Nazi figure, was put in charge of this massive undertaking. His authority was immense, giving him the power to control almost every aspect of the German economy, from raw material allocation to factory production quotas. The plan effectively ended the free market in Germany and placed private industry under the direct command of the state. Companies were no longer primarily focused on making profits for their shareholders. Their main purpose was to fulfill the production targets set by the government. The Four-Year Plan prioritized the military above all else. Resources were systematically diverted from consumer goods to the production of tanks, aircraft, submarines, and munitions. Factories that once made civilian products were forced to retool for war production. The government dictated what companies would produce, how much they would produce, and what prices they could charge. This level of state control was honestly unprecedented in a capitalist country. While it created an economic boom and virtually eliminated unemployment, a major propaganda victory for the Nazis, it was built on an unsustainable foundation of massive government debt and preparation for a war of conquest. The German economy was transformed into a war economy long before the first shots were fired. This state-led mobilization of industry was highly effective in the short term. German military production soared. The country developed and built some of the most advanced weapons of the time, such as the Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighter plane and the Panzer tanks that would prove so devastating in the early years of the war. The Four-Year Plan created a powerful synergy between Nazi political goals and German industrial might. Business leaders, while losing some of their independence, were often willing collaborators. They benefited from huge government contracts, the suppression of trade unions, and the promise of new markets and resources that would be seized from conquered territories. However, this system of total state control also had its weaknesses. The bureaucracy was often inefficient and riddled with internal rivalries, as different branches of the Nazi Party and the military competed for control over resources. The focus on quantity sometimes came at the expense of quality, and the German economy struggled to keep up with the combined industrial power of the Allies, particularly after the United States entered the war. Despite these limitations, the Four-Year Plan was a crucial element of Hitler's strategy. It successfully harnessed Germany's industrial capacity for a single purpose: to build a military machine capable of waging a total war of aggression. A central pillar of the Four-Year Plan was the concept of autarky, or economic self-sufficiency. Hitler remembered how the British naval blockade during World War I had crippled the German war effort by cutting off supplies of essential raw materials and food. He was determined that this would not happen again. The goal of autarky was to make Germany immune to a blockade by producing everything it needed within its own borders or from territories it controlled. This was, honestly, a monumental task, as Germany was naturally poor in many key industrial resources, such as oil, rubber, and certain metal ores. The quest for self-sufficiency became a national obsession, driving a wave of scientific and industrial innovation. To overcome these natural shortages, German scientists and engineers were tasked with developing synthetic or ersatz materials. This became a major focus of industrial research. The chemical giant IG Farben, with strong government backing, led the way in this field. They perfected processes for producing synthetic rubber, known as Buna, and for creating synthetic fuel from Germany's abundant coal reserves through a process called hydrogenation. These breakthroughs were vital for the German war machine. Without synthetic fuel, the Luftwaffe's planes could not have flown, and without synthetic rubber, the Army's tanks and trucks could not have moved. The development of these ersatz materials was a remarkable technical achievement. The drive for autarky also shaped Germany's foreign policy and military strategy. The desire for Lebensraum, or living space, was not just an ideological goal, it was also an economic one. Hitler planned to conquer the vast, resource-rich lands of Eastern Europe, particularly the Soviet Union. These territories would provide the food, oil, and other raw materials that Germany lacked, finally making the dream of a self-sufficient empire a reality. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, was in large part a resource grab, aimed at seizing the oil fields of the Caucasus and the fertile agricultural lands of Ukraine. The quest for autarky was therefore a direct cause of the war's expansion. Ultimately, the goal of complete self-sufficiency was never achieved. Germany's ersatz production, while impressive, could not fully meet the immense demands of a global war. The German war machine remained dependent on imports from neutral countries, such as iron ore from Sweden and tungsten from Spain. Furthermore, the synthetic production processes were incredibly expensive and energy-intensive. Despite its failure to achieve full autarky, the program had a profound impact. It spurred significant technological innovation, reshaped the German economy, and provided a powerful economic justification for the Nazi policy of territorial expansion and conquest. The search for ersatz materials was a clear example of science being harnessed to serve an aggressive and expansionist ideology. No single company better illustrates the sinister alliance between German industry and the Nazi regime than IG Farben. Before the war, it was the largest chemical company in the world, a symbol of German scientific and industrial prowess. It was a leader in producing dyes, pharmaceuticals, and agricultural chemicals. However, with the rise of the Nazis, IG Farben transformed itself into one of the main pillars of the German war effort. The company's leaders saw the Nazi Party's goals of rearmament and conquest as a massive business opportunity. They enthusiastically embraced the four-year plan, becoming the primary producers of essential war materials. IG Farben's contribution to the Nazi war machine was immense and multifaceted. The company was at the forefront of developing and mass-producing the ersatz materials that were crucial for Germany's military operations. They manufactured the synthetic rubber for tires, and the synthetic fuel that powered the tanks and airplanes. They also produced explosives, poison gas, and many other chemical products vital for modern warfare. The company's expertise and industrial capacity were so important that it was often referred to as a state within a state. Its directors worked hand in hand with military and government officials to plan and execute the economic aspects of the war. The company's collaboration with the Nazi regime went far beyond just producing war materials. IG Farben became directly and deeply involved in the Holocaust. The company held the patent for and manufactured Zyklon B, the cyanide-based pesticide that was used to murder millions of people in the gas chambers of Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Furthermore, IG Farben financed and built a massive synthetic rubber and fuel factory at Auschwitz, known as Buna Werk 4. This factory was constructed using slave labor from the adjacent concentration camp. Tens of thousands of prisoners were worked to death for the benefit of IG Farben's profits, in one of the most horrific examples of corporate complicity in history. After the war, several of IG Farben's directors were tried for war crimes at Nuremberg. They were charged with plunder, slavery, and mass murder. While some were convicted, their sentences were relatively light, and many were released early and went on to have successful post-war careers in German industry. The company itself was broken up into several smaller firms, some of which, like Bayer and BASF, are still major global corporations today. The story of IG Farben serves as a chilling case study of how a respected and innovative company can become an instrument of terror and genocide when its pursuit of profit is combined with a criminal and inhuman ideology. The pursuit of technological supremacy under the Nazi regime came at a terrible human cost, and not just on the battlefields or in the factories. The moral and ethical foundations of science and medicine completely collapsed in Germany. With the state's encouragement, some doctors and scientists abandoned their duty to heal and instead engaged in horrific human experimentation. Concentration camps provided a ready supply of human subjects who were considered subhuman by Nazi ideology and were therefore seen as expendable. These experiments were conducted without consent and with a complete disregard for human life and suffering. At camps like Dachau, SS doctors conducted cruel experiments for the supposed benefit of the German military. For example, prisoners were submerged in ice water to study hypothermia and how to revive pilots who had been shot down over the cold waters of the North Sea. Others were placed in low-pressure chambers to simulate the effects of high-altitude flying on aircrews. These experiments caused agonizing pain and death for the victims. In other camps, scientists like the infamous Josef Mengele at Auschwitz conducted sadistic and medically useless experiments on twins and other prisoners, driven by a grotesque obsession with racial genetics. These were not legitimate scientific inquiries. They were acts of torture disguised as research. This moral corruption was not limited to a few rogue individuals. It was a systemic problem that infected parts of the German medical and scientific community. Prestigious research institutes and universities were aware of and sometimes participated in these unethical practices. For example, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics received human specimens, including the eyes of victims murdered by Mengele, for study. The professional ambition of some scientists, combined with the pressures of the totalitarian state and the dehumanizing Nazi ideology, led them to abandon the most basic principles of medical ethics. The legacy of these human experiments is a dark and permanent stain on the history of science. They yielded little to no useful scientific data, as the methods were flawed and the results were obtained under extreme and unrepeatable conditions of duress and torture. The primary result was unimaginable suffering and death. This chilling chapter serves as a permanent warning about the profound dangers of scientific research that is divorced from ethical oversight and a fundamental respect for human dignity. It demonstrates that when science is made a servant to a hateful ideology, it can become one of the most powerful tools of barbarism. When the war ended in 1945, the Allied powers found themselves in a strange position. They had defeated a brutal and criminal regime, but they were also confronted with the advanced technology that regime had created. The scientific and engineering innovations developed under the Nazis had a profound and complex legacy that continues to influence our world today. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the victorious nations scrambled to capture German technology and recruit its scientists. This effort, known as Operation Paperclip in the United States, saw hundreds of German researchers, including key figures from the V-2 rocket program, brought to America. The most famous of these scientists was Wernher von Braun. Despite his past as a member of the Nazi Party and his use of slave labor to build his rockets, his expertise was considered too valuable to ignore. He and his team became central figures in the American space program. Von Braun was instrumental in developing the rockets that powered the Cold War arms race and eventually a man to the moon. The Saturn V rocket, which launched the Apollo missions, was a direct descendant of the V-2 rocket that had terrorized London. This created a difficult moral legacy. The technology that enabled one of humanity's greatest achievements was born from a program that involved slavery and mass death. The influence of Nazi-era innovations can be seen in many other areas as well. The concept of the jet fighter, which the Germans were the first to deploy in combat with the Messerschmitt Me 262, revolutionized aerial warfare and became standard for all modern air forces. German research into synthetic fuels and materials, while driven by the need for autarky, contributed to the post-war growth of the global chemical industry. Even the Volkswagen Beetle, once Hitler's propaganda project, was reborn after the war and became a global cultural icon, a symbol of peace and counterculture, in a remarkable historical irony. Reflecting on the relationship between science, industry, and the Nazi state provides crucial lessons. It shows how technology, which is often seen as neutral, can be powerfully shaped by and used to advance a political ideology. The German example demonstrates that scientific innovation without a strong ethical framework can lead to catastrophic outcomes. The story of Hitler's science is not a simple tale of evil scientists. It is a more complicated and disturbing story of ambition, collaboration, moral compromise, and the immense pressure exerted by a totalitarian state. It serves as a permanent warning that the pursuit of knowledge and progress must always be connected to a fundamental commitment to humanity.